Welcome back, all my fur-covered degenerates, to the Lewd Lycanthrope. I'm your host, Chuck Dewclaw. And once again, we're diving headfirst into history. You know, the time before basic human rights, soap, or maybe the concept of, let's not do this. Because if there's one thing our ancestors excelled at, well, besides dying of preventable diseases anyway, it was coming up with batshit insane ways to send people to the afterlife. Now, death is inevitable for all of us. One day you'll clock out for the last time, hopefully in your sleep or maybe even mid-orgasm. But some unlucky bastards weren't so fortunate. Nope, they got absolutely obliterated in ways so grotesque, so over the top, well, you'd think a horror writer and a medieval torture enthusiast teamed up for a passion project. So pour yourself a drink, maybe put down that snack. Well, unless you're into gag reflexes anyway. And prepare to once again question how humanity ever made it this far. Because if history has taught us anything, folks, it's that people love getting disturbingly creative with murder. Now let's get into this list, shall we? Well, alrighty, folks. Coming in at number 5, we've got Mithridates of Pergamon, a guy who made the very unfortunate mistake of pissing off the entire Persian Empire. Now, most executions back then were already nightmare fuel, but the Persians, they went above and beyond. Instead of just killing him, they sentenced him to scaphism, also known as the boats, or as I like to call it, the all-you-can-eat human buffet. Now, here's how this absolute horror show went down. First, they took 2 hollowed-out wooden boats, put one on top of the other, and wedged Mithridates inside. His head, hands, and feet sticking out. So far, not too bad, kind of uncomfortable, but survivable. But then things got real nasty. They force-fed him milk and honey, not out of kindness, but to make sure he started violently shitting himself inside the boat. If that wasn't disgusting enough, they smeared the honey all over his exposed skin so that every fly, gnat, and disease-ridden nightmare bug in Persia, well, they could crawl over him and get to work, if you know what I mean. Now, you might be thinking, wow, that sounds awful, but at least it's quick, right? No. Mithridates rotted alive for 17 days. That's over 2 weeks of being trapped in his own filth while insects ate him from the inside out. Maggots burrowed into his flesh, flies laid eggs in his wounds, and he was fully conscious for most of it. And here's the kicker. By the time he finally died, he wasn't even recognizable as a human anymore. His body had basically fused to the boat, kind of turning him into a living, breathing corpse soup of sorts. Now look, I get that the ancient executioners like to get creative. But why did they have to go so damn hard? Just stab a guy and call it a day. But no, let's turn him into a human compost bin. Brutal. And that, my friends, is only number 5 on our list. And if you think that one was bad, well, trust me, we're just getting started. Moving on to number 4, we've got Giles Corey, a man who got the literal weight of the law thrown on him. So it's 1692, the Salem witch trials are in full swing, and people are getting accused of being a practitioner of the dark arts left and right. Enter Giles Corey, an 81-year-old farmer who made the mistake of pissing off the wrong people. He gets accused of witchcraft, but instead of playing along with the Puritan kangaroo court, he refuses to enter a plea. Now, why would he do that? Because back then, if you were found guilty, the government could seize your property. But if you never entered a plea, your land would go to your family instead. Smart move, right? Well, in theory, anyway. See, the Puritans had a little trick for people who wouldn't talk. Pressing. And no, that doesn't mean they just asked him really, really hard. It means they laid him on the ground, put a wooden board on top of him, and started stacking heavy stones on his chest. At first, he stayed quiet, just lying there, taking it. But as the weight increased, so did the pressure, literally. His ribs started cracking, breathing became impossible, and every muscle in his body was being crushed. But even as the sheriff leaned in and asked him to finally enter a plea, Giles Corey only said 2 words: more weight. And they gave it to him. They kept piling stones on him for 2 days, until his body just finally gave out. But he never broke. He never pleaded guilty. He never confessed. He just held on until he physically couldn't anymore. And the wildest part, well, his plan worked. Because he never entered a plea, the government couldn't take his land, and it passed directly to his family. The man literally got crushed to death out of pure spite. And he won. Now, I'll admit, most deaths on this list are gruesome, but this one's just badass. If you're going to go out, that is definitely how you do it. And we're only at number 4, so buckle up, because it's going to get way worse. Well, alrighty, coming in at number 3, we've got Liu Jin, a man who went from one of the most powerful figures in China to the unfortunate recipient of Ling Qi, better known as Death by 1,000 Cuts. And trust me, it's even worse than it sounds. Jin was a eunuch, or a nobleman during the Ming Dynasty, and not just any nobleman. He was the nobleman. At one point, he was the most powerful man in the empire, controlling military, government affairs, and most importantly, a shit ton of money. Naturally, this made him a lot of enemies. And in 1510, those enemies convinced the emperor that Jin was plotting a coup against him. Whether it was true or not didn't matter, because the emperor sentenced him to the worst execution imaginable. Enter the Ling Qi, the slowest, most excruciating way to die in ancient China. This wasn't just about killing Jin, it was about humiliating him, breaking him, and making sure no one ever challenged the emperor again. The execution began with small cuts, tiny slices of flesh from his arms, chest, legs. The goal wasn't to kill him fast, it was to prolong his suffering. Cut after cut, his body slowly began being carved away. Then came the bigger pieces. Chunks of muscle, sections of skin, fingers, ears, toes. And here's where it truly gets insane. Jin was sentenced to 3,357 cuts. Yeah, you heard that right. Obviously, no one could survive that many, so most historians believe the executioners sped things up after the first few hundred. But even lasting through the first 50, nightmare fuel. And to make it even worse, this wasn't a private affair. People were forced to watch. Ling Qi wasn't just about death, it was a warning. The emperor wanted to make sure everyone knew what happened when you got too powerful. So after ruling China from behind the throne, Jin died in the most gruesome way imaginable. Piece by bloody piece. And with that, the empire moved on, like he never existed. And if you think that was bad, just wait till you see number 2. Well, alright, coming in at number 2, we've got Balthazar Gerard, a guy whose execution makes medieval torture look like a kinky first date. So it's the late 1500s, and the Netherlands are trying to break up with Spain. Leading the charge is William of Orange, and Spain is not taking it too well. King Philip II is so salty about it that he straight up puts a bounty on William. 25,000 gold crowns to anyone who can take him out. Enter Mr. Gerard, a die-hard Catholic who sees this as his big chance to go from nobody to somebody. He shoots William point blank in the chest, probably thinking, hell yeah, I just secured that bag of money, baby. But no. The only thing he secured was the worst execution in Dutch history. William's guards, of course, tackled his ass immediately, and from that moment on, Gerard was basically a human stress ball for an entire pissed off country. First, they stripped him naked and beat him like a piñata. Then, for fun, they whipped him until his skin looked like raw hamburger. But hey, that was just them saying hello. Then came the creative phase. They burned his hands off with red-hot irons because, hey, can't be an assassin without trigger fingers, right? Then they put him in a spiked collar and iron boots and slowly crushed his feet until his bones sounded like bubble wrap of sorts. But wait, there's more. Because at this point, the Dutch were basically just freestyling torture techniques. They cut open his stomach and pulled out his intestines. While he was still alive, by the way. Just to see how long they could keep the show going. And for the grand finale, well, they tied him to 4 horses and pulled him apart. Slowly. His head went on a pike, his limbs got sent to different cities, and somewhere in the afterlife, William of Orange was probably watching saying, "Damn, guys, I think we got him." Look, I get it. Assassinating a head of state is a big deal. But boiling, burning, gutting, and quartering him, at some point it stops being an execution and starts being a very hands-on anger management session. And here's the wildest part. This ain't even the worst one. But let's find out what that one might be. Well, alright folks, strap in because we've reached numero uno. If you thought the last ones were bad, well, this one is horrifically extra. Let's talk about Emperor Valerian, shall we? The only Roman emperor to go from ruler of an empire to a human piece of taxidermy. So it's 260 CE and Rome is shitting itself. The empire's falling apart, enemies are kicking in the front door, and the Persians, led by Shapur I, a man with a passion for humiliating Romans, well, he's handing them L after L. Enter Valerian, the Roman emperor who decides, you know what, I'm gonna fix this shit. He marches east with his army, fully expecting to save the day. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. Instead, he gets captured alive, which is literally the most embarrassing thing that could happen to a Roman emperor. Imagine being the guy who's supposed to be the divine ruler of the known world, and now you're just Shapur's new pet. Now, most prisoners of war might get executed quickly, but Shapur took one look at Valerian and said, nah, we're going to get weird with this one. First, he turns him into a human step stool. No, seriously. Every time Shapur needed to mount his horse, Valerian had to get on all fours so he could step on his back. Imagine being the Emperor of Rome and your final job title is Royal Doormat. But oh no, we're just getting started. After years of treating Valerian like a literal piece of furniture, Shapur finally decides it's time to kill him. And he doesn't just go for the boring, run-of-the-mill executions either. Kind of like beheading or crucifixion. Oh no, that would be too normal. Instead, he decides to make an absolute spectacle out of it. Shapur allegedly has molten gold poured down Valerian's throat. Let's take a second to appreciate how fucking insane that is. This man died like a goddamn dragon horde in a fantasy novel. His throat melted shut, his organs cooked from the inside, and I'm guessing for a few agonizing seconds he was basically a Roman fondue fountain. And you think that would be enough, right? Well, you'd be wrong. After he was good and dead, Shapur had him flayed, stuffed with straw, and turned into a goddamn trophy. That's right, this man went from ruler of the empire to a Persian arts and crafts project. His skin was literally put on display as a warning to the Romans, because nothing says we fucking own you like turning your enemy into a leather couch. Now, some historians say the gold thing might be a Roman exaggeration. Because let's be honest, the Romans were sore losers and they loved making their enemies sound like Bond villains. But whether he was boiled from the inside out or just turned into a haunted scarecrow, one thing is certain. This man had the worst death of any Roman emperor for sure, but I would say probably most others as well. But I'm curious to know what you guys think. Let us know in the comments. And there you have it, my friends. Proof that history wasn't just violent, it was a goddamn fetish for some people. If nothing else, this should make you appreciate modern life a little more. Sure, we've got bills, awful dating apps, and the existential horror of another work week, but at least nobody's trying to turn your suffering into a spectator sport. So the next time you're spiraling about embarrassing drunk texts or that mystery charge on your bank statement, just remember, it could be so much worse. You could be an interactive anatomy lesson for a crowd of people who think soap is a government conspiracy. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into humanity's worst hold my beer moments, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment before that nasty algorithm just buries me alive. But until next time, my friends, stay loud, stay lewd, stay furry. We're going to catch you in the next video. Well, that is assuming none of us end up as a historical cautionary tale first, anyway. Stay safe out there, folks.